Hi, welcome again to Who's Who in Southern Alberta. Well, this week we're into high finance. I'm going to know more about credit unions than I ever expected to know, and hopefully you people will too. Our first guest today is Arlene Albiez. Now, Arlene, you and I go back a long, long time, but I didn't quite remember where I met you, but it goes back to Graffin's Drugstore, and it must be in the 50s, I bet, when you were working there, and I think I started delivering drugs and whatever, the bag over my shoulder, and away I went. From there, you've progressed into the big high finance of the credit union. Tell me, what's the big deal about credit union right now, about what you're doing?
Okay, I'm a board member for Southland Credit Union. I've been on the board for 11 years, and part of my duties are member services and the 50th anniversary that we're celebrating this year. And I came on the board, some time ago, 1980, when I got a phone call from one of the board members asking me if I'd consider letting my name stand for the board. And I said, "You mean my husband?" He said, "No." He said, "I mean you." And here I am.
I see. And you know, the basic question is, and I'm sure everybody out there is wondering, okay, now I'm going to finally find out what a credit union is. Could you give us a brief rundown of what it is?
Credit unions are basically people helping people. It started, as I recall, with you promised to save when you became a member, and then you opened a membership account, and your money was pooled with other members and lent to prospective borrowers.
Sounds like a bank to me.
Somewhat like a bank. We have all the extra services and so on, but when people couldn't get a loan in a bank, they came to credit unions.
So this goes back, and you say it's 50th anniversary, so we're talking about way back in the late 30s. Is that when it got started?
Yes, it really did. Actually, today is our 50th anniversary. We're 50 years old officially today. We were in business prior to that, but our charter didn't come into being until 50 years today.
Okay.
Bernie Merchant, longtime member of Lethbridge and District, was active in credit unions and introduced them from Eastern Canada. He didn't have anything to do with our credit union as such, but he was very enthusiastic, and he introduced credit unions here.
Was yours the first credit union in Lethbridge?
No, we're actually number 40 in the province of Alberta, and I'm not too sure about being the first one in no, Catholic. St. Patrick's Credit Union was first.
So I gathered that these organizations sort of grew around a social club or a church or something like this. Was there always something in place ahead of time?
Certainly the Catholic credit unions grew around the church and a group like that. Our own grew out of a need of people needing to borrow money and people helping people.
Yeah, I see. There was no particular, there wasn't a Southland group of some sort before that, though?
Not to my knowledge.
I see. Okay, so tell us about, it's 50 years now then, and you're celebrating your big 5-0. What is planned for this year?
Okay, we had a cake cutting ceremony, and we honored 50 of our oldest memberships this morning. And we had also 5 or 6 builders. These are dedicated volunteers and people who have done a tremendous amount to more or less build the credit union. And our next function, our official function, will be in October, our gala banquet on October the 19th.
Now I hear that you're putting together a book on this 50 years as well. Is that right?
Yes, we have a university student writing a book for us, and it's near completion now.
Is it a picture book or
it will be a combination of pictures and history and real life stories, successes, and so on.
What is the membership of the organization now, do you know?
Currently we have about 7,300 members. Now that's not member accounts. Member accounts is a different figure altogether.
I still want to come back to this difference between a bank and a credit union. If I had a car dealership, for example, and I needed a lot of money to bring in cars, would I go to a credit union or would I go to a bank?
Well, I think you could go to a credit union, but again, that would depend on the assets, and I think perhaps the general manager is more in a position to answer that
And
than I am.
we're going to come
Bruce.
to him a little later. Okay, can you tell me some of the exciting things that have happened in the, you're writing a book, so there has to be something in there. What are some of the exciting things that have happened in the last 50 years? Any bank robberies?
We haven't had one, but I know Nanton Credit Union had one. No, we, to my knowledge, we have never had a bank robbery. Exciting. Guy Powers was one of our first managers or heads of the credit union here, and we used to meet in his living room, and you could apply for loans there, and again you had to promise to save before you even got a membership, and at that time $5 was the membership fee. And I have an exciting thing I would like to account. My son, when he was going to school, wanted to earn some money to continue on to school, and he borrowed $75 from the credit union to buy a rototiller, and he paid that rototiller off in less than a week. So he thought that was pretty good business to be in.
Yes.
He was only 14.
Interesting. So the managers, do the managers mostly come from the banking fraternity? Like the people, or do they work their way up into credit through credit unions, or how does that work?
We have a combination of both. We have some from the banking system, and a lot of our people are internal promotions or from other credit union systems. And again, I would refer to the general manager to answer some of those things.
Okay, I want to get back to some of the individuals, because I think this was the idea that we'd maybe talk about some of the background of the people that are involved, not just the organization. So in the time that remains, how about telling me a bit about your background? Were you raised in this area?
Yes, I was born in Coaldale, and I've lived in Lethbridge all my life. I've been in the pharmacy field with the pharmacy for 17 years, and with the Canadian Cancer Society for a number of years in a volunteer capacity as well as a staff person. And at present, I'm a federal election officer for the federal government for Elections Canada. Whenever they say the word, we're having an election, it puts all the switches on and we go to work.
So how many of those federal election officers would they have in the city?
Just one.
So you're the one
I'm
for the
it
whole
for
city?
Southern Alberta.
Okay, so that sounds pretty important to me.
It's a lot of work and a lot of headaches.
This isn't a volunteer thing, though.
No, it isn't.
No. Have you done this before for other elections?
I have 4 federal elections behind me and 3 provincial elections.
Holy crow. So, and you're called what?
Federal Returning Officer for the now Lethbridge constituency. Used to be Lethbridge Foothills.
So this would be sort of the general manager of setting the whole thing up?
More or less.
I see. And I assume you're not supposed to be biased towards any political party or anything like that?
No, we treat them all very nicely and give them all the information they need and help them through all the rough spots, and whatever happens outside of our office is up to them.
And how did you get into this?
Actually, I went door knocking years ago with some of the politicians, and I was always interested in politics. I actually like the background of politics. But when I became an officer, I had to put that all behind me, and you have no thoughts on political ambitions then.
So you were knocking, and this is how you got interested in politics, and somebody come along one day and say, hey, we need a returning officer, and we'd like to be you, or do you apply for the position, or how does that work?
No, someone came along and asked. As a matter of fact, they phoned me from Ottawa and asked me, and I said, oh my goodness, I can't answer that quickly. Well, he said, I have to know by tomorrow morning. Could you phone before 7? But I had been a provincial officer, so I thought, well, this is a little bit larger, but if I could do that one, I'm sure I could do this one.
And how did you get into the provincial, doing it for the provincial?
That was again door knocking and provincial appointment. The federal one is an appointment from the House. The provincial one was a local appointment.
Now, do we, when the election's on, do we hear your name, or are you just one of those people in the background that nobody ever talks about, or do they just say the returning officer?
You only hear my name when somebody makes a mistake or the media doesn't print the right thing, and then I really get it, and then you hear all about it.
So you're not supposed to, you're supposed to be away, sort of packed away somewhere, and
not really.
Anonymous?
No, not really. That was the old hat, anonymous. The returning officer, nobody knew who they were. They were sort of kept in the dark all the time. Not now. The new trend is to make yourself known, make it yourself known to the constituents. If they have any problems, they can come and ask for your help. And there's many, many things out there that a lot of the constituents do not know.
Oh, I bet. Now, do you, everybody knows you're doing this then now. Have you ever had cases where somebody tries to do a little politicking between elections and this type of stuff?
Actually, I don't have anything to do with the politics. The only things that I really work on are mechanics. Now, if someone reports to me that somebody is doing something out there that's illegal or outside of the act, then it's my duty to report it. Other than that, it's not my problem.
Do you keep busy during the whole year from election to election, or is it just something that really happens just as the election is approaching?
Okay, basically as the election is approaching and for a year after. But when we do a revision, which is realigning all the boundaries and polling divisions, then I have about 6 to 8 months work with the mapping and boundaries and counting noses.
Interesting. Well, we started off talking about the credit unions, and then we end up into the federal, provincial elections, and this is part of the idea of who's who in southern Alberta, is to peel away some of the pieces and find out where people are coming from. And I want you to pay attention to what's happening this year then. It's the 50th anniversary of Southland Credit Union, and they're pretty proud of going for 50 years, and I think southern Alberta should be too, because it's great to see these things flourish and go on and evolve over the years. And thanks for being our guest, and we'll see everybody in just a few minutes. Well, we're back again talking about credit unions, the 50th anniversary of the Southland Credit Union. They're putting out a book this year. They're having celebrations, I guess, the whole year. And our guest now is one of the former head honchos of the organization, and Ed Steegan, who, Ed, you're from Lethbridge. You were working in Lethbridge before you got involved in the credit union. Could you tell us a little bit about your background, what you used to do, and how you got tied in with the credit union, and what you're doing since?
Well, after I came out of the Army in 1946, from that time I was married and soon moved into Lethbridge. And in Lethbridge, I was employed by the Tea Eaton Company. And while at the Tea Eaton Company, the timekeeper, who was then the treasurer of the credit union, which they were called general managers, and he more or less talked me into taking an interest in the credit union by telling me all about it.
Was he trying to get you to simply invest in the credit union or use it as a savings vehicle? Or
I think he was trying to do a little bit of both. I think he was trying to get me to join the credit union as a credit union and to invest in it and to become active as an officer. That was his purpose, I believe, at the time.
And you were working at Eaton's at the time.
Yes.
What were you doing at Eaton's? What type of work?
Well, at the time that he did this, I was driving a delivery wagon for Eaton's. And I came into the back where he had the timekeeper's office and had quite a bit of association with him. And from then on, he just attempted to get me to join the credit union and take an interest in it by telling me all about it. And it just went from there. When I joined the credit union, 2 months later, I was elected to the supervisory committee of the credit union.
Now, was this a sort of on the board, or is
the credit union at that time had 3 committees. There was the credit committee, the board of directors, and the supervisory committee. The board of directors, of course, directed the operations of the credit union. The credit committee approved the loans, and the supervisory committee audited the books and made sure the treasurer was doing what he was supposed to be doing, and of course the directors also were following the guidelines.
So all of a sudden you're thrust from the delivery wagon into high finance.
Well, to a degree, but of course this was strictly volunteer at that time.
It sounds to me like it was sort of a club atmosphere. Is this true or not?
Well, very definitely. The credit union organization at that time was a group of people helping people, and to attain their goals in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
As we all know, it was difficult for people, and a dollar meant a dollar in those days. The entrance fee was 25 cents, and of course the membership fee was $5, as Arlene has told you.
What do you mean by entrance fee?
Well, there was a 25 cents entrance fee at that time, and this used to cover the cost of the passbook and so on and so forth.
So you paid $5 to join, plus 25 cents.
25 cents membership fee.
I see. And yet you just have to pay that 25 cents once?
That's right. This only happened once.
I see. Okay. So why did you get into it? Was it that you were trying to figure out a way to save, or?
Well, to a degree, yes. I think we were all doing this, and the way the credit union was promoted, it came out in such a way that if you took out a loan, and when you repaid your loan, you would put so much into savings each month also. And so it was probably 6 months after I joined that I took out my first loan. But just to give you an example, and it's only an example, is that if you borrowed $100 and you were repaying this loan, you may repay it over the period of 10 months or a year. The interest rate at that time was 0.5% per month on the unpaid balances. These loans were also life insured at no extra cost. Mm-hmm. As was your savings in the credit union was also life insured. And we encouraged the people, when they took out a loan, even if it was $100, then in paying back their loan, they may pay $12 a month on $100, should we say. And of course, the first month, the interest on the $100 would probably be 50 cents, eh? So we would try and set them up at a payment of probably $12 a month, and have the other $1.50 go into savings. And the second month there'd be $1.60, and so on and so forth. And when they had their loan repaid at the end of the period, when they looked at the savings they had in there and how much they'd saved over the period of time that they would not have saved had they not used that method.
So basically you looked upon it as an educational vehicle.
Education.
As well, eh?
That's right, and I think this is where a lot of the people received a lot of assistance from the credit unions down through the years, was through the type of financial counseling they received when they took out a loan or when they deposited savings. And then two I might mention, and I don't think this has been brought forward, but the credit unions were the first institution to ever insure savings or loans. And this came to pass in 1936 in Estes, Colorado, when the CUNA Mutual insurance company was formed by the credit unions throughout North America to form an insurance company of their own to insure all loans and savings of all members, and to also ensure that if a person took out a loan with a credit union, that the debt would die with the debtor. Mm-hmm. And these are just some of the things, and of course now I've been away from it, and a lot of these things aren't with me anymore, but they do come back.
Right. Now you, so you worked out on a voluntary basis. After a few months, you were already on some of these boards.
I was on about 3 months after I joined. I was on.
Okay. And then eventually you ended up on the paid staff, right?
That's right. But this, of course, took a period of time. I served on the supervisory committee for I think 3 or 4 years, and then I became assistant treasurer to help Guy, because he had his job at Eaton's to look after, and also the books, and I used to go help him with these and help him with the collections. Like we just had probably 1 or 2 nights a week that we were open for business and to collect the various monies that come in. And then for a while I was just acted as assistant treasurer, and then I was on the board of directors plus being assistant treasurer. And then in 1962, I think around Christmas time, when Mr. Powers passed away. And then, of course, I was left there with it and took over the operation of it. And in 1963, I operated it on a part-time basis. And I had a fellow from the credit committee, Ed Aubert, who was a staunch credit union worker also from the credit committee. And he helped me out what he could through that time. And during the year of 1963, the board of directors thought they had best move and start a full-time operation of it because they were starting to be getting to be more money. We were then up to about 200,000 in assets. And this seemed like a lot of money to us at that time.
Now, in those early years, do I get the impression is the loan might be $100 or $200? Is this what most of them were? Very small?
They were small to start out with, and I could say we handled loans of $10. And it was quite a while before we could look after the $500 loans, and then, of course, upward from that, as we were able to supply the money, and the money came in, and we were able to supply a larger loan, we did it. And this, of course, was kept at our fingertips all the time. And if the need was there, we would, bypass the regulation that we may have in, if need be, to accommodate some person where the need was greater. So all the organization was based on the members' needs at that time.
Well, I want to talk about this some more, but we'll get some of our other guests to talk about this. Before we leave you, though, I'd like to know what you've been doing since you retired. When did you retire? And
yes, I took early retirement in a sense. From the time, like in '63, I started as manager, if you would, or in '64, full-time manager. And in 1978, my sister's health had kind of fallen back, and her husband was more or less down. He couldn't work no more. And it was a family store out northeast of Brooks, and so some way or another I got talked into buying the store and taking it over, the operation over from them. And I had then spent 15 years as manager of the credit union, plus 10 years on a voluntary basis. And I just thought, well, maybe that's a nice thing to go on to. And I did. We went out, the wife and I. The wife had a lot of experience at Safeways. We went out and we bought the store. We made a good success of it. And in 1985, we sold it and retired back to Lethbridge.
I see. And this store was where? North of Brooks, did you say?
North and east.
That'd be where? Patricia?
Idasley.
I see.
Yeah, just about 18 miles east of Patricia.
So then you came back to your own stomping grounds, and what have you been doing since then?
Not any more than I had to. Tried to get in a little golfing and a little more time with my family. As you can appreciate, during my time as manager of the credit union, with the committees involved, there was a lot of night meetings. There may be 3 to 4 nights a week that you would be tied in with meetings, and then we had 1 or 2 nights open a week, so that my time was spent, an awful lot of it, for the credit union, and I didn't have that much time for my family. And I thought, when I retired, that will have to change, and I'm going to spend more time with my family.
So you're enjoying yourself?
I'm enjoying myself.
Well, that's good. Well, thanks very much for coming, Ed, and I hope that the celebrations this year are a great success and you have a great time, and that everybody involved in the organization has time.
Thank you very much, Bruce.
welcome again to Who's Who in Southern Alberta. Well, we're following the line that we've been following for the last week, which is the development of the credit union industry in Southern Alberta, specifically the 50th anniversary of Southland Credit Union, which is being celebrated this year. And our guest today is Mike Bennett, who is currently president. That sounds pretty impressive. He's going to tell us just how impressive it is, of the credit union. Welcome to the show, Mike, and tell us what is the job of the president?
Well, the job of the president sometimes becomes pretty hair-raising, but it's actually, you're the head of the board and responsible for seeing that the board is run, meets regularly, has committee meetings, reviews the finances of the credit union, the policies. We, as a board, as a president of the board, you're the chairman, so sometimes you don't have to talk as much. You have to listen, and when things aren't going the way you think they should be, sometimes you do get in and talk a little bit more than you should. You need to learn a little bit of diplomacy, how to run a meeting properly, and be in contact with Central and with the government. The government auditors are in contact directly with the president because they review the finances of the credit union on a quarterly basis to make sure that we're following within the Act. And they send us a report to the president in confidentiality, and if we have any problems, then we take it to the board. It would go to the board anyway, but if there's problems that need corrections, we get onto that right away. We direct the general manager what he should be doing with the staff or what problems, and discuss. It's a very close liaison with the general manager. The general manager is there doing the day-to-day operations, looking after the staff, keeping up on the money markets, how to run, how to invest our money. We as board members are volunteers, so we're general lay people like everybody else, any of our members. So we have to rely on a lot of expertise from our general managers, so we have to shop around at the time when we want a general manager to find a person that's very capable and who we can put a lot of trust in to look after the organization for us. But ultimately, we, the board, are the responsible people.
Now, you were mentioning earlier that this is a volunteer basis on your side here, and that your basic occupation is you're with environment.
Right. That's right.
It just doesn't seem like we know that anybody who works for the government doesn't have to go to a credit union. They got lots of money, right?
Well, that's a fallacy, but it's good. I would like to think that.
So the question arises: how did you get interested in this, or is this
into the credit union?
Yeah.
Well, I got interested when I was just a young fellow, back in 1956. I had just finished buying a car, and I wanted some more money, and I didn't like the prices that the finance company charged. It was acceptance finance at the time that I went to. It was outrageous, and I wanted to buy an accordion because I wanted to impress some of the girls at school. I thought if I could learn to play, I would be, a great hit. So I took accordion lessons, and I had talked to another young friend who had had a paper route in the city, and he said he financed his trombone through the credit union, and he said, you should go over there and try that. And so I went over and talked to Guy Powers, and actually Ed was there at the same night, Ed Steegan. I think you've talked to Ed. And said, well, this is what you have to do. You have to save, and if you put in a certain amount of money, you have to have 10% of the money you want to borrow. So I saved until I got $50 surplus in my savings, and I borrowed $500 to buy this accordion, and made my payments. At the time I was working weekends at the Purity Dairy, so I had a job for Saturday and Sunday, and that's where my money went, besides paying that and gas to run my car.
Okay, so when you're finished and you've got your accordion and you've now got all these girls and stuff, what kept you in the credit union vogue? How come you stuck around?
Well, I found that it was a very good place to and reasonable to pay back your money. You knew what you were paying. I noticed when you were talking to Ed, he said interest payments at those times were 0.5%. Well, inflation had hit by the late 50s, and the interest then was 1% per month on the unpaid balance. But that was a lot more reasonable than the 17 and 18% that finance companies were charging you. And I wanted, when I finished high school in 1959, I wanted to continue on to college, and I went to Calgary Tech, and we didn't have a lot of money in our family, so I went to the credit union, and Ed had just informed me today when we were having our open house at the credit union that my loan was the first loan that they'd loaned to a student to continue school with as a student loan.
Did you think when you were 59, you were graduating from high school, you never thought of actually going into banking, that, hey, this is kind of fun, I'll go into banking? That never crossed your mind?
No, it didn't cross my mind at all. How it just happened that because you were a member, every year you're invited to, anybody who has a member is invited to the annual meeting. And it's your privilege and duty to come out and make comments known that you have to the board, because it's all local run. And I thought I would just try this. I was young, out of school. I was just married shortly after that, and this would have been in about 63, and I attended a couple of the annual meetings. And then I was approached by Ed Steegan if I would let my name stand for the supervisory committee. Because I showed an active interest. I must have asked the wrong questions or some tough questions, because they got me to stand for the board. And in 1966, I first became involved with the supervisory committee. And I've been involved since in one way or another as on the board until present. And it was just interesting to, I found I was learning something more and new about financing all the time, and I find every year that I'm learning something new, and it's a real challenge being on the board.
So you've been president now for 3 years.
For 3 years, yes.
Where do you go from there? Or are you at the top now?
Well, I have some aspirations that I might like to serve as a representative on Credit Union Central, which is the central organization that credit unions do their banking through, or have servicing set up, such as our check clearing, this type of thing, that we have a central banking service, and they have a board that's run, and the next progression would be to be a member on that board. And that would just give me a little more insight in the board.
I see.
Currently under the new Credit Union Act that was just passed here a couple of years ago, all the board of directors now are required to be trained. Before, you were just any volunteer. Now, when you agree to be a board of directors, you have to take a credit union director development training program that is a correspondence type of course, but it's run with a 3.5-hour lecture for each segment. And you don't have to do all 13 modules at one time for the 1 year to be on, but so long as you agree to take a couple each year, you're allowed to continue on as a member, and I've completed 9 of them now.
Well, obviously you enjoy, you have enjoyed throughout your lifetime working through this organization. Before we run out of time, though, I want to talk about your background, family background. You were mentioning earlier that your family were homesteaders in the very early days.
That's right.
Could you just tell us where and when they came to this area?
Yes, they homesteaded mostly in West Lethbridge. One of the very first ones, you gotta get back a long way here, but I'm trying to think here. Well, anyway, the Davises, Josh Davis and Susan were married, and they homesteaded in the river bottom in West Lethbridge, where the new golf course is going. And my grandmother, Mary, was born there, and she married Bob Crawford, and they also took a homestead out in West Lethbridge, and their homestead was just about a half-mile west of the Willowbrook subdivision in West Lethbridge. Right now, there's a small bit of remnants that are still sitting up there, and my mother and her twin brother were actually born in that house.
Interesting.
So we've had a long standing. And
what year did they settle in that area? Do you remember?
I don't know the exact year, but it was in the late 1800s.
So it'll be kind of interesting when that golf course gets into full bloom to be able to say, I was there.
That's right. Well, my grandmother always used to say, and people have said to me, why, what would your grandmother think now if that was a golf course? And before she had passed away, she said, you know, that would be a beautiful place for a golf course. And if she was around now to see it, she would think it was a great development there. It's something
good.
she's always wanted to see happen in that valley.
So you went to school in Lethbridge, or did you go to
I went to school in Colhurst. I lived just outside of Lethbridge. Actually, when I was born, we lived in Shaughnessy because my dad worked at the Shaughnessy coal mine for 13 years before leaving the coal mine and then working for Purity Dairy for the remainder of his working career. And we lived on a small farm just outside of Lethbridge. Here, just 7 acres actually, so it was very small.
Question I'm sure a lot of people would like to know the answer to now that we have a Purity Dairy person here. Whatever happened to the big milk bottle that used to be there? Do you remember the big milk bottle that they used to have hanging on the
Yes, I do.
hanging on the hill?
Yes.
You don't know what happened?
I don't know what happened to that.
Well, maybe
but
some of our listeners know the answer.
Somebody might have heard, yeah,
Because that was quite a showpiece for many, many years.
for a lot of years.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for coming, Mike, and it's interesting to see how, and this is something I've noticed with all the guests that we've had, and we've got more coming, that the credit union seems to be not just a business, it seems to be a way of life that people become much involved in.
It's truly a way of life, and it's truly, your money is local. It's local money, kept locally, kept within Alberta, actually within the community. Only if we have surplus money do we put it out. But we look after small loans and very large loans. We have some very large business loans, and we're capable and as competitive as any bank.
Now, would you still do a $10 loan?
No, the money's involved right now. $10 would hardly buy you a few chocolate bars, so $10 loans would be pretty far and few between. We may look at some smaller ones, but the administrative cost on doing the paperwork now that's required would make the interest rate you would have to charge fairly high. What we would look at if somebody wanted a small loan is probably trying to have them look at a credit card and then set them up with a credit card and a repayment schedule. And then you can look at your $300, $500 limits that you can go out and buy and pay down as you want. And you can either do it through a debit card, which comes direct out of your bank account, or an overdraft that you set up to work in a borrowing way, or a straight MasterCard, which is a charge and then you pay it each month.
Right, right. Well, thanks again, Mike, for being our guest this week, and we'll continue looking at some of the other personalities that are involved in the credit union business in Southern Alberta, and I'm glad to see that you've enjoyed it as much as you have.
I've certainly enjoyed it, Bruce, and I hope to continue serving there. It's a volunteer service, and it's just fun. It's a nice outlet from my day-to-day job.
Great, great. We'll see you next week, or we'll see you in a few minutes. This is taking a break, and we'll be back with our final guest on the credit union story. Hi, we're back again for our last segment on the credit unions. See, I told you were going to know more than you ever thought you'd ever want to know about credit unions. And this is where we get the real crash course, because our guest now is Michael Wagner, who is the general manager currently of the Southland Credit Union. And we're going to find out why we should, or why people go to one of these places as opposed to the bank. That's the most obvious question. So let's start with that one, Michael.
Well, I think the service, the fact that each member of a credit union isn't a customer as in a bank, they're actually an owner. They actually purchase shares of the credit union, and they have a say in the policies of the credit union. Indirectly, they have the say to establish the service charge levels in the credit union. And speaking of service charges, credit union service charges are approximately 40% to 50% less than they are in the charter banks or the trust companies.
Okay, then the next obvious question is, why doesn't everybody leave the banks and go to the credit union?
Well, I think that we're seeing, I think Southland Credit Union over the last number of years have, I think as part of some of the numbers you've seen, from starting at these very frugal beginnings in 1941, Southland Credit Union is now a $46 million credit union. So we're seeing a great influx of new members to credit unions for some of those reasons.
One of the things that I've noticed as we've done this series is that it's not just a place to borrow money, it almost becomes a part of the family. These people become very close to this organization, at least in the early days. You mentioned that you can't get $10 loans anymore. How do you manage to keep this feeling? Because I mean, obviously this is one of the big drawing cards, is to be able to keep this feeling.
I think that feeling is kept by people like Arlene and Mike Bennett and all of the volunteers who sit on the board. There are 9 board members. In addition to that, there are other committees such as member relations committees and the credit committee, so that if you as a member or an owner have a problem, you can go to people who live in the community and discuss your problems with them. The other thing is that while I'm the chief executive officer of the credit union, my door is always open. It must be open. That's part of the requirements of the board, is that I readily accessible to the membership. My photograph and my phone number is in all of the branches, as is the president's and the branch managers, and it's that this ownership aspect, that each member is an owner of the credit union, and as an owner you have more rights, more privileges, and that's prevalent throughout the organization.
Okay, now how about the fact that you're in business and you want to take out a loan, but you feel that, hey, I don't think this guy should have that loan, but he's been in the organization for 40 years. How do you say no to him?
Well, that's where the board has hired people like myself and my branch managers and people who report to me, who have the education, the technical expertise to analyze his financial statements, his credit history, his business, and so on, and and the security. So in those terms, we're really no different than a bank. Our criteria is very similar. We also insist on some type of security. You have to also show your ability to be able to repay that loan, and you have to have sound credit history. So our quality control is the same. What's a bit unique though in the credit process, unlike the banks, you can actually, if you had a disagreement with the credit union or the credit committee, you can actually come down and talk to the person that made that decision, and sit down with them and give them additional information or talk to them face to face. You simply don't have that opportunity in any other type of financial organization, and that's also unique to credit unions.
Now, you were mentioning earlier that your background is banking.
Yes.
How many years were you in the bank?
I was with the chartered banking system 17 years.
Now, could I tell you what made you see the light?
Well, I saw a continuing centralization of the banking system, moving back to Calgary, back to Toronto, the escalation of service charges, and in particular my area, which I was more recently in when I left the banks, was in agriculture. The banks, and certainly the bank I was with, virtually pulled out of the agricultural market in southern Alberta. And it seems that, and it's only my personal opinion, that the eastern-based banks tend to ignore the West, or if things aren't progressing the way they want economically, they'll simply pull out of an area or out of a segment of the economy. And that and the service charge levels it became intolerable. And the other thing for me personally was that to get ahead in the banks, you had to move around a lot, and that was unfair on myself and my family. And an opportunity came to stay in Lethbridge, and we liked Lethbridge, and an opportunity came along, and I was tired of moving every 2 or 3 years, so that was the other nice thing.
Now, one of the questions that I'm sure I guess it's the basic question that everybody wants to know. How safe is my money in a credit union as opposed to a bank?
Well, it's much safer, actually. The Credit Union Deposit Guarantee Corporation is a corporation that was formed by the government of Alberta to ensure depositors, all depositors of credit union funds. Their level of guarantee is unlimited. So all deposits that you have, be it $1 million or $10 million or $10, including the interest, is guaranteed by the Deposit Guarantee Corporation of Alberta, which in turn is under Dick Johnson's department at the Alberta Treasury.
Okay, why is this so? I mean, why do they have this extra protection that a bank? Everybody knows the banks are the stable things. Now you're telling me that I'm wrong, or that the credit unions are even safer. Why is this so? Why has this happened? Why is the government backing the credit unions even more so than the banks?
Because I believe that there are provincial and local organizations where their funds stay in Alberta, in Lethbridge, in communities where credit unions are, as opposed to excess funds in the charter banking system, for instance, going back to Toronto or wherever they are. And we're no different, though, than any other provincial organizations, such as the Alberta Treasury Branch. So they've done the government has done the same thing with the Alberta Treasury branches.
Is this something that just happened a few years ago? Because there was, I keep thinking of that teachers' credit union that went belly up, must be 10, 15 years ago now, where there were an awful lot of teachers that lost a lot of money. Is this something that's happened since then?
I'm not sure when having only been with the credit union 6 years, certainly it's been around much more than the 6 years I've been in the system, where the province of Alberta has provided that level of protection to credit union depositors. They've done that for many, many years. The credit union you were speaking of was a British Columbia-based credit union, and I'm not sure what their legislation was. It was not, obviously, the same as the level of protection that the government has given to the credit unions here.
Well, before we get into this last segment, I've got to find out what you do when you're not playing games in the bank. What are your hobbies, for example?
Well, I play squash. I play squash competitively.
Oh, competitively?
Well, yeah, and I try to be competitive, but it's getting harder as my hair gets grayer. So,
so what have you competed in?
Well, I'm a B-level squash player. So we travel around Calgary and southern Alberta mostly, and I enjoy that. Hitting that little black ball, getting our frustrations out. That's a nice way to pass the time.
Squash as what's the game that's sort of like squash but not quite?
Racquetball, same sort of enclosure.
Okay, what's the difference between squash and racquetball?
Well, squash has a tin that's 18 inches above the floor in the front of the court, and the ball travels much more slowly, and you have more control with a squash ball. A racquetball tends to zing around the court, and squash is more like badminton, actually. Is there some reason why you were into squash as opposed to racquetball? I was a badminton player years back, and I found that you could actually control a squash ball similar to a badminton bird, whereas a racquetball, you can't do anything with it, in my opinion, other than hit the thing hard. So there is more dimension to a squash game.
Which is a more popular game?
Squash is I would think is a more popular game right now. I think racquetball had its heyday, but I think it's declined quite rapidly.
I remember back in the early 50s when I went to school down in Ontario, they played squash. I had never heard of it before that. It wasn't something they did out here at that time. And there was a fellow in school who was the British Empire squash champion at the time. And that's the first I heard of it. Now, that room was, one of the problems seemed to be nobody could watch it. Well, you can maybe get 12 people. It wasn't a spectator sport. Right. Have they changed that? Do they have glass cages now, or?
Yeah, some of the international tournaments, they have 4 walls are all glass, and players are inside it, and they're viewed from all around.
Wouldn't that make it a little hard playing it when you're bouncing this thing? And
I think it's probably very difficult to get your depth perception. I think, yeah. So I've never played at that level, so I wouldn't know.
Well, very interesting. Well, we've had a lot of fun with this series of covering everything from squash to high finance. And again, I want to congratulate the people involved in this organization. And one of the things that I've noticed from this whole series is the word involved, because the people that are in the credit union seem to be people that actually get involved and become part of the whole feeling of the movement. And congratulations on your 50th, and I hope everything goes well. And I'm glad that Cablevision has been able to play a small part in bringing this awareness to the community.
Thanks very much.
And everybody, we'll see you next week when again we try to figure out who's who in Southern Alberta.